The Plaza Hotel in New York City was transformed into a vision of elegance. White silk ribbons and fresh flowers adorned every corner, while crystal chandeliers cast a warm, ethereal glow throughout the grand ballroom. Soft classical music blended with excited chatter as guests arrived for what promised to be the wedding of the season. I stood in a quiet corner of the ballroom taking it all in. Today was my brother Nathan's wedding day, and as his only sister, I couldn't contain my pride. Nathan looked impeccable in his custom tuxedo, his handsome face radiating joy as he greeted guests. At 35, he was 5 years my senior, but he had been so much more than just a brother to me. After our parents died in a car accident when I was just 19, Nathan became my rock, my protector, my entire world. "You look beautiful, Jess," a familiar voice murmured in my ear as strong arms encircled my waist. I smiled and leaned back into my husband Tyler's embrace. "I was just thinking how handsome Nathan looks," I replied, watching my brother laugh with some college friends. "After everything he's done for me, for us, he deserves this happiness." Tyler nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "He certainly does. Olivia is a lucky woman." I smiled in agreement. Olivia Williams was breathtaking with her delicate features and soft-spoken manner. Throughout their courtship, she had treated me like a sister, and I truly believed our small family had found its missing piece. I thought we had all found our happily ever afters. Nathan with Olivia and me with Tyler, my talented architect husband of 5 years. "They're the perfect match," Tyler continued, squeezing my hand. "Just like us." His words warmed my heart. We had built what everyone considered a dream marriage. Mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that seemed unbreakable. In my eyes, Tyler Bennett was perfection itself. "I'm going to get us some champagne," he said, releasing me with a final kiss. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I watched him disappear into the crowd, admiring how handsome he looked in his tailored suit. I wanted to capture this perfect day, so I decided to find Nathan and Olivia for some pre-ceremony photos. Scanning the room, I noticed Nathan deep in conversation with the wedding planner, but Olivia was nowhere to be seen. And I suddenly realized neither was Tyler. I checked my watch. The ceremony would begin soon, and I wanted those pictures. Perhaps they had stepped outside for some air. I made my way through the crowded ballroom toward the east wing, where a small balcony overlooked the hotel's magnificent gardens. As I approached the end of the hallway, I heard hushed voices and a woman's familiar laugh. My footsteps slowed instinctively. Through the partially open glass door to the balcony, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Tyler, my husband of 5 years, was locked in a passionate embrace with Olivia, my brother's bride still wearing her immaculate white wedding gown. His hands caressed her waist as they kissed deeply, completely oblivious to my presence. Time seemed to stop. The sounds of the wedding faded to a muffled buzz as blood rushed in my ears. I pressed my back against the wall, fighting waves of nausea. Surely this couldn't be real. Maybe they were practicing for a surprise dance, or maybe, "You're playing a dangerous game meeting me here today." Olivia's flirtatious voice shattered my desperate rationalizations. "Who's going to catch us?" Tyler replied with a laugh I'd never heard before, arrogant and dismissive. "They're all running around like obedient puppets. That brother of hers is nothing but a lovesick fool." Still, Olivia sighed, her arms still draped around my husband's neck. "I don't like the idea of living with you and your wife. When will you get rid of her?" My legs nearly buckled beneath me. "Get rid of me." What was happening? Tyler's laugh turned even colder. "Don't be jealous of Jessica. She's nothing but a means to an end. I only married her for her family connections. She opened doors to elite clients that would have taken me years to reach otherwise. Once we've secured Nathan's fortune, we can do whatever we want." "And how long will that take?" Olivia purred. "Not long. Between your position as his loving wife and my trusted business advice, we'll drain the Myers Corporation dry within a year, and our friend will be very pleased." I couldn't breathe. 5 years of marriage, all a calculated lie. The love I thought we shared had been nothing but a mask for Tyler's ruthless ambition. I stumbled backward, tears streaming down my face. Without conscious thought, I found myself moving through the hallways, vision blurred and mind racing. I collided with someone, a solid, familiar presence. "Jessica, what's wrong, Nathan?" My brother. His handsome face swam into focus, brow furrowed with concern. "Nathan," my voice cracked as I collapsed against him, unable to hold back the torrent of tears. Between sobs, I told him everything I'd just witnessed. The kiss, the conversation, the cruel truth behind my marriage and his upcoming one. I expected shock, fury, pain, but as I spoke, Nathan's expression remained oddly controlled. When I finished, he gently wiped my tears away and looked directly into my eyes. "I know, Jess." "You know?" I pulled back, staring at my brother in disbelief. "What do you mean, you know?" Instead of the devastation I expected, Nathan's face held a calm determination I'd only ever seen when he made critical business decisions. He glanced around the hallway, then firmly took my elbow and led me to a small antechamber reserved for the groom. After making sure no one had followed us, he locked the door behind us. The room was festooned with white ribbons and silver balloons, a stark contrast to the heavy conversation about to take place. "I've known for 3 months," Nathan said quietly, guiding me to sit down. Something about Olivia's behavior started to feel off. She showed an unusual interest in specific company projects, details most fiancés wouldn't care about. And Tyler, he shook his head. The way he acted around her at family dinners, subtle glances standing too close, things only someone watching carefully would notice. My mind reeled. While I had been blindly happy, my brother had been silently observing, piecing together the betrayal happening right under our noses. "I hired a private investigator." He continued, pulling out his phone. "What they discovered was worse than simple infidelity." He showed me several photographs Tyler and Olivia at hidden rendezvous points, intimate dinners at obscure restaurants, and secret meetings with a distinguished older man I recognized as Robert Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Holdings, one of our main competitors. "This isn't just about an affair, Jess," Nathan said, his voice hardening. "They're pawns in a larger game. Look at this." He opened a folder containing printed emails between Tyler, Olivia, and Blackwood. As I read them, I felt physically ill. The plan was organized in calculated phases. Olivia would marry Nathan to gain legal access to company assets, while Tyler would use his position as my husband to gather inside information and influence key decisions. Together, they would gradually siphon funds, create fictitious debt, and ultimately bankrupt the company our parents had built from the ground up. "Blackwood," I whispered, the name suddenly making horrible sense. "Wasn't he Dad's main rival?" Nathan nodded grimly. "The same man who drove Dad to the brink before he died. He's been waiting for years to destroy what's left of the Myers name. And he found the perfect puppets in your husband and my fiancé." I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the betrayal. My marriage, 5 years of what I thought was love, had been nothing but a business transaction, a stepping stone in someone else's vengeful plan. "But if you knew all this," I looked up, confusion cutting through my grief. "Why did you go through with the wedding preparations? Why not just call it off?" A sharp glint appeared in Nathan's eyes, one I'd never seen before. "Because if I'd broken the engagement, we'd have only caught 2 small fish while the shark swam free. We didn't have enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "I decided to turn the wedding itself into a trap, a stage where everyone can witness their downfall." My brother squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, I've secured the company's essential assets in a protected trust. The projects they're targeting are shell operations with no real value, and I've installed recording devices throughout the venue." His eyes softened as he looked at me. "Your discovery today was unexpected, but it's actually perfect timing. They'll never suspect you now. They'll just see you as the heartbroken wife. That gives us an advantage." Despite my pain, I felt a spark of determination ignite within me. These people hadn't just betrayed our trust. They had conspired to destroy our parents' legacy. The tears dried on my cheeks as anger replaced despair. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, straightening my shoulders. Nathan smiled, and for a moment I glimpsed the brother who had protected me all these years. "Just play your role. Be shocked, be hurt, which won't be difficult, I know. The more devastated you appear, the less they'll view you as a threat." A knock on the door interrupted us. "Mr. Myers, the ceremony begins in 5 minutes." Nathan stood and adjusted his bow tie, his face transforming into that of the eager groom. He looked at me with newfound respect. "Ready for the show, little sister? It's about to begin." Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "Let's give them a wedding they'll never forget." The wedding hall was a vision in white and gold when Nathan and I emerged. Guests were taking their seats as soft orchestral music filled the air. Near the entrance, I spotted Tyler and Olivia chatting animatedly with some of Nathan's business associates, the picture of innocence. When Tyler saw me, he quickly excused himself and hurried over his face a mask of concern. "There you are, Jess. I've been looking everywhere for you." He reached for me, but I stepped back instinctively. "Are you okay?" "You look like you've been crying." I said nothing, just stared at him with red-rimmed eyes. Let him think I was emotional about the wedding. It was better than revealing what I knew. I moved closer to Nathan, who squeezed my arm reassuringly. Tyler seemed momentarily confused by my coldness, but quickly recovered. "Well, the ceremony's about to start. I saved us seats in the front row." The solemn wedding march began playing, and guests turned expectantly toward the entrance. Olivia appeared radiant in her designer gown, a vision of purity that now seemed sickeningly false. Nathan took his position at the altar, smiling broadly, the perfect picture of a man in love. I sat in the front row beside Tyler, fighting the urge to recoil when he put his arm around me. His touch, once a comfort, now felt like a snake coiling around my shoulders. "Aren't they perfect together?" he whispered in my ear. "Just like us." The irony was almost unbearable. I nodded mutely, focusing on Nathan's face. My brother was an impeccable actor. Not once did his expression betray the truth he knew. The officiant welcomed everyone warmly and spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the beautiful journey Olivia and Nathan were about to embark on together. Each word felt like a mockery of the truth. Just as the officiant invited Nathan to recite his vows, a voice rang out from the audience. "Wait, stop this wedding." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as everyone turned to see a well-dressed, middle-aged woman standing in the center aisle. Her elegant appearance contrasted with her distraught expression. "Who is that?" Tyler whispered, genuinely confused. I shrugged, equally baffled. This wasn't part of what Nathan had shared with me. The woman marched determinedly toward the altar. "Olivia, how could you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "After everything my son gave you." Olivia's face drained of color. "Mrs. Anderson, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to stop you from making a mockery of love. Again." The woman turned to address the stunned guests. "This woman was engaged to my son for 3 years. They were planning their own wedding when she suddenly left him for a better opportunity." She spat the words. "She continued taking his money for so-called investments right up until 3 months ago." Murmurs of shock and disapproval spread through the crowd. Olivia's perfect facade began to crack as she looked desperately at Nathan. "These are lies," she stammered. "We broke up amicably a long time ago." "Lies." Mrs. Anderson reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of photographs, flinging them toward the altar. They scattered across the floor, images of Olivia with another man looking very much in love. "These are from your engagement party with my son, dated 6 months ago." Olivia seemed to shrink under the collective stare of hundreds of judging eyes. Her gaze darted frantically between the photographs, and Nathan silently pleading for help. But Nathan, who should have been devastated by these revelations, merely folded his arms and regarded her with cool detachment. Seeing her performance failing, Olivia clutched her chest dramatically and collapsed onto the floor, feigning a faint. Her family members rushed forward, creating a scene of chaos as they called for help. Nathan calmly stepped forward, picking up the microphone the officiant had dropped in shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice resonating through the hall. "I apologize for this unexpected drama, but I believe the truth should always come to light." He glanced down at Olivia, who was peeking through her eyelashes to gauge the room's reaction. "Your acting skills are impressive, Olivia," he said coolly, "but I think it's time to end this charade." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. Even Olivia's unconscious form went still. "And to make this performance even more interesting," Nathan continued, "I'd like to invite another special guest to join us, someone very closely connected to this deception." My heart began to pound as Nathan turned to look directly at Tyler beside me. The spotlight followed his gaze, suddenly illuminating us in the front row. "My brother-in-law, Tyler Bennett," Nathan announced. "Would you please join us on stage?" Tyler froze beside me. I could feel the tension radiating from him as hundreds of eyes turned in our direction. "Go on," I whispered, giving him a gentle nudge. "Nathan probably wants you to say a few words about marriage." The irony in my voice was subtle but unmistakable. Tyler glanced at me sharply, sensing something wasn't right, but with everyone watching, he had no choice. Adjusting his tie nervously, he made his way to the altar. Nathan greeted him with a brotherly embrace that appeared genuine to everyone but those of us who knew the truth. Tyler is not just my sister's husband, Nathan addressed the crowd, but a talented architect and trusted family advisor. We've relied on his expertise for many important business decisions. Tyler smiled uncomfortably, clearly unsure where this was heading. In fact, Nathan continued, his tone subtly shifting. He and my beautiful bride seem to have developed quite a close working relationship. Olivia's eyes snapped open, abandoning any pretense of unconsciousness. Perhaps too close, Nathan added softly. He signaled to someone at the back of the hall. The large screens that had been displaying romantic photos of the couple suddenly went dark. When they illuminated again, they showed crystal-clear footage of the hotel balcony from less than an hour ago. Tyler and Olivia locked in a passionate embrace, their conversation captured with perfect clarity. "Who's going to catch us? They're all running around like obedient puppets. That brother of hers is nothing but a lovesick fool. I don't like the idea of living with you and your wife. When will you get rid of her? Don't be jealous of Jessica. She's nothing but a means to an end." The ballroom erupted in gasps and exclamations of shock. Tyler staggered backward as if physically struck, while Olivia scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of panic. This is fake," Tyler sputtered, pointing at the screens. "It's been doctored." But the evidence was irrefutable. The recording continued to play, revealing every detail of their conspiracy, every cruel word about me, every calculated plan to exploit my brother's trust. From my seat in the front row, I let my tears flow freely. Not the shocked tears of new discovery, but the deep, painful tears of finally confronting the truth in public. Around me, guests were either staring in horrified fascination or averting their eyes from my grief. Nathan waited for the initial shock to subside before speaking again. His voice was calm but carried throughout the now silent hall. "I invited you all here today to witness what I believed would be one of the happiest days of my life," he said. "Instead, you've witnessed something else entirely. The true faces of the people I almost welcomed into my family." He turned to Olivia and Tyler, who stood frozen in humiliation. "But this betrayal," he continued, his voice hardening, "is merely the surface of a much darker conspiracy." Nathan pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and held it up for everyone to see. "This wedding was never about love," he announced. "It was about this." He opened the envelope and removed several documents, walking toward the front row, where a distinguished older man sat rigidly in an expensive suit. I recognized him immediately as Robert Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Holdings and our family's longtime business rival. "Mr. Blackwood," Nathan addressed him directly, "I'm surprised you accepted my wedding invitation. I wouldn't have thought such a personal event would interest you." Blackwood maintained an impressive poker face, but I noticed a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "I've always appreciated a good celebration, Mr. Myers," he replied smoothly. "And you've certainly provided memorable entertainment." "Indeed," Nathan nodded, passing the documents to a young woman I recognized as a junior reporter from the Financial Times. "I believe you'll find these particularly entertaining, Ms. Parker. They detail a systematic plan to destroy the Myers Corporation through fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage." The reporter's eyes widened as she quickly scanned the papers. Behind her, other journalists who had been covering the society wedding pulled out their phones and began taking notes. "These documents," Nathan continued, addressing the room at large, "outline how Mr. Blackwood recruited and paid my fiancé and my brother-in-law to infiltrate my family and gain access to confidential information. Their ultimate goal was to bankrupt the company my parents built and allow Blackwood Holdings to acquire it for pennies on the dollar." Blackwood stood abruptly. "These are baseless accusations, Myers. You'll be hearing from my attorneys." "I look forward to it," Nathan replied calmly. "I'm sure they'll be fascinated by the recorded conversations between you and your accomplices." He gestured toward Tyler and Olivia, who looked as though they might collapse. "Or perhaps they'd be interested in the offshore accounts where you've been hiding the funds intended for this operation." Blackwood's composure finally cracked. He straightened his tie and began making his way toward the exit. "Mr. Blackwood," called a deep voice from the back of the room, "I'm afraid we need you to remain here." Two plainclothes detectives moved forward, blocking Blackwood's path. The older of the two held up a badge. "Detective James Morris, NYPD Financial Crimes Division. We have some questions regarding allegations of conspiracy and attempted fraud." The assembled guests watched in stunned silence as the respected business leader was escorted to a quiet corner for preliminary questioning. What had begun as a society wedding had transformed into a public takedown of a corporate criminal. On stage, Olivia seemed to realize that her world was collapsing. With a sudden, desperate shriek, she lunged toward Nathan. "You've ruined everything!" she screamed, tearing a sharp hairpin from her elaborate updo and thrusting it toward his face. Several people screamed, but before the pin could reach its target, a blur of movement intercepted her. Tyler had thrown himself between them, catching Olivia's wrist. The pin grazed his shoulder, tearing through his expensive suit and drawing blood. "Enough!" he shouted, his face contorted with a complex mix of emotions I couldn't decipher. "It's over, Olivia." Security guards rushed forward, restraining the hysterical bride as she continued to scream accusations and threats. Tyler stood there, blood seeping through his white shirt, looking utterly defeated. As Olivia was led away, he turned to face me. Our eyes met across the room, his filled with what appeared to be genuine regret, mine still damp with tears. "Jessica," he began, taking a step toward me. "I save it." I cut him off, my voice surprisingly steady. "Whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it." Tyler's shoulders sagged. "You have every right to hate me. But what I did just now, stopping Olivia, that was real. Maybe the only real thing I've done in years." I stared at him, searching for any shred of the man I thought I had married. Was any of it real, Tyler? Any moment in our 5 years together? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to give me the answer I needed. That silence told me everything. "Get medical attention for that cut," I said coolly, turning away from him. "You'll need to look presentable for your arraignment." The grand ballroom that had been prepared for celebration now felt like the aftermath of a battlefield. Guests were leaving in shocked clusters, whispering intensely amongst themselves. Journalists were making frantic phone calls, undoubtedly breaking the story of the scandal that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. Nathan approached me, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, watching as Blackwood was escorted from the building by the detectives, his imperious demeanor finally shattered. "He was behind it all, wasn't he?" I asked. "Not just this conspiracy, but everything that happened to Mom and Dad, too." Nathan's expression darkened. "I believe so, though we couldn't prove it then. Dad always suspected Blackwood had something to do with the financial troubles that led to his heart attack, but he could never find concrete evidence." "Well, I said, it looks like Blackwood's finally going to pay for his crimes." As we stood amid the ruins of what should have been a joyous occasion, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. The betrayal cut deep, but the truth, however painful, had finally come to light. "What happens now?" I asked, looking around at the scattered flowers and abandoned champagne glasses. Nathan squeezed my shoulder. "Now, little sister, we rebuild, just like Mom and Dad taught us." I took a deep breath and nodded, feeling stronger than I had all day. The path ahead would be difficult. Divorce proceedings, potential criminal trials, reconstructing my sense of trust. But for the first time, I could see beyond the immediate pain to a future where the truth had set us free. "Together," I agreed. Just like always. The weeks following Nathan's ruined wedding passed in a blur of legal meetings, press statements, and sleepless nights. The scandal made headlines across the country. Corporate espionage exposed at socialite wedding. CEO Blackwood arrested in elaborate fraud scheme. Bride and groom's brother-in-law in illicit affair. I avoided the news as much as possible, but there was no escaping the whispers and sympathetic glances whenever I ventured out in public. New York suddenly felt suffocating. Every street corner, every restaurant, every boutique held memories of my life with Tyler. Memories that were now tainted with the knowledge that it had all been a calculated performance. 1 month after the wedding turned disaster, I sat in my attorney's sleek Manhattan office signing the final divorce papers. The proceedings had been quick and uncontested. Tyler, facing criminal charges for his role in the corporate conspiracy, had relinquished all claims to our shared assets. The beautiful brownstone we'd renovated together would be sold, with my portion of the proceeds going into a new bank account, one without his name attached. "Ms. Myers," my attorney said gently as I set down the pen, "the divorce will be finalized within 30 days. Is there anything else you need from me today?" I shook my head, suddenly exhausted. "No, thank you for expediting everything." "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind my asking, what will you do now?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. The future I'd planned, The family I'd hoped to start with Tyler, the life we'd been building, had vanished overnight. At 30 years old, I was starting over completely. I need some time away, I admitted. Somewhere quiet where I can think. Later that afternoon, I found myself in Nathan's office at the Myers Corporation headquarters. He'd been working tirelessly to stabilize the company after the attempted sabotage, but he never failed to make time for me. Looking at him now, his tie-loosened sleeves rolled up dark circles under his eyes, I was reminded of how he'd looked in the difficult days after our parents' deaths. "The divorce papers are signed," I told him, sinking into the chair across from his desk. He nodded. "That's good, Jess. The first step forward." "I've been thinking about next steps," I said, running my fingers along the edge of his desk. "I need to get away from New York for a while, somewhere I can breathe." Instead of the protest I half expected, my brother simply asked, "Where will you go?" "Napa Valley," I replied. "I've rented a small cottage for 3 months. It's in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by vineyards. No society parties, no familiar faces, just peace and quiet." Nathan studied me for a moment. "I think that's exactly what you need. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning." He rose from his chair and came around the desk, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I'm going to miss you, little sister, but I understand why you need this." I clung to him, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support. "Thank you for not trying to talk me out of it. After everything you've been through, you deserve to heal on your own terms." He pulled back his hands on my shoulders. "Just promise you'll check in regularly, and if you need anything." "I know," I smiled. "You're just a phone call away." The next morning, as my plane soared westward, I felt the weight of the past month beginning to lift. With each mile that separated me from New York, I breathed a little easier. By the time I landed in San Francisco and drove the rental car north to Napa, I felt like a different person. Still wounded, but finally able to imagine a future beyond the pain. The cottage I'd rented exceeded my expectations. Nestled among oak trees at the edge of a sprawling vineyard, it was small but charming, with a stone fireplace, beamed ceilings, and French doors opening onto a tiny patio with breathtaking views of the valley. That first evening, I sat outside with a glass of local Cabernet, watching the sunset paint the rolling hills in shades of gold and purple, and felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. My days in Napa fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the patio, followed by long walks through the vineyards or along the hiking trails that crisscrossed the valley. Afternoons were spent in small, cozy cafes where I would read or work on the business proposal I'd been developing, an idea for a design consultancy that had been percolating in my mind for years, but that Tyler had always discouraged. "You're a Myers," he would say whenever I brought it up. "You don't need to work." Now I understood why he'd wanted me financially dependent on him. It had been part of the plan all along, keeping me isolated from my own potential so I wouldn't interfere with his schemes. That realization strengthened my resolve to build something of my own. 3 weeks into my Napa sojourn, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I was sitting in a rustic cafe on the outskirts of St. Helena. The converted farmhouse was popular with locals rather than tourists, which suited me perfectly. I'd claimed a small table by the window and spread out my notebook, sketching preliminary logos for my new venture. "Excuse me," a deep voice interrupted my concentration. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up, ready to politely decline company, when recognition dawned. The man standing beside my table, a steaming mug in one hand, was vaguely familiar. Tall, with broad shoulders, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, and striking blue eyes. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "The cafe is packed, and this is the only free chair I can see." Glancing around, I realized he was right. Every other table was occupied, likely due to the unexpected rainstorm that had just begun outside. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Please join me." As he sat down, studying me with curious eyes, I suddenly remembered where I'd seen him before. "You're the officer who handled my fender bender last year," I blurted out. "In New York. Officer Reed, right?" He looked surprised, then pleased. "Good memory. It's Michael, actually. Michael Reed." He extended his hand. "And you're Jessica Myers, though I have to admit I didn't expect to run into you here in Napa." I shook his hand, noticing his firm but gentle grip. "Likewise. Are you on vacation?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not exactly. I transferred to the Napa County Sheriff's Department about a month ago. Needed a change of scenery after 15 years with the NYPD. "That's quite a change," I observed, intrigued despite myself. Michael Reed had made an impression on me during our brief encounter in New York. Professional but kind, with an easy manner that had calmed me after the accident. "What about you?" he asked. Last I checked, the Myers family was a New York institution. I hesitated, wondering how much he knew about the recent scandal. If he'd been in Napa for a month, he might have missed the worst of the media frenzy. "I'm taking some time off," I said carefully. "Needed my own change of scenery." Something in my tone must have conveyed that I didn't want to elaborate, because he simply nodded and changed the subject. "What were you working on so intently?" he asked, gesturing toward my notebook. I found myself explaining my business concept, a boutique design consultancy that would help small businesses develop cohesive brand identities. "I've always had an eye for design," I admitted. "I studied it in college before." I trailed off, remembering how I'd set aside my own ambitions after meeting Tyler. "Before life took you in a different direction," Michael suggested gently. "Exactly." I smiled, grateful for his perception. We fell into easy conversation. Michael told me about growing up in Oregon, his 20 years in law enforcement, and his decision to leave the intensity of New York for the relative tranquility of wine country. "The pace here suits me," he explained. "I was burning out in the city. Too much stress, too little connection to anything real." I understood exactly what he meant. For the first time in months, I found myself genuinely enjoying someone's company, free from the constant undercurrent of suspicion that had colored my interactions since discovering Tyler's betrayal. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the cafe's tin roof and fogging the windows. Neither of us seemed inclined to venture back into the storm, so we ordered more coffee and continued talking. Michael was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions about my design ideas without prying into my personal circumstances. As afternoon faded into evening, the cafe began to empty. I glanced at my watch, surprised to discover we'd been talking for nearly 3 hours. "I should head back before it gets too dark," I said reluctantly, gathering my things. Michael nodded, standing as I did. "It was really nice running into you, Jessica." "You too." I hesitated, then added impulsively, "I come here most afternoons if you ever want to continue our conversation." A warm smile spread across his face. "I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, my afternoon cafe visits took on new significance. Michael didn't appear every day, but when he did, sliding into the chair across from me with a cup of black coffee and that same warm smile, the hours flew by in engaging conversation. He never pushed for details about why I'd really left New York, though I suspected he'd eventually looked me up and discovered the scandal. Instead, he shared stories about his own life, his brief failed marriage in his 20s, his decision to become a police officer after his sister was the victim of a home invasion, his passion for hiking and landscape photography. Gradually, I found myself opening up to him, not about Tyler or the betrayal, that wound was still too raw, but about my childhood, my parents, my relationship with Nathan, and my dreams for the future. Michael listened without judgment, his steady presence a balm to my battered trust. One Saturday in late October, he invited me on a hike to a secluded viewpoint he'd discovered. "The foliage is at its peak right now," he said. "The valley looks like it's been painted in watercolors. I thought, maybe you'd like to see it, unless that's too forward," he added quickly. I surprised myself by agreeing immediately. The prospect of spending time with Michael outside our cafe meetings didn't trigger the anxiety I expected. Instead, I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. The hike was magical. Michael guided me along hidden trails that wound through golden vineyards and vibrant forests. The autumn air was crisp and scented with pine, and the conversation flowed as easily as it did in the cafe. When we reached the summit, I gasped at the panoramic view of Napa Valley spread below us, a tapestry of reds, oranges, and yellows under a brilliant blue sky. "It's breathtaking," I whispered. Michael stood beside me, closer than he'd ever been, his shoulder nearly touching mine. "Worth the climb." I turned to look at him, struck by how the sunlight highlighted the silver in his hair and deepened the blue of his eyes. "Definitely worth it." Something shifted between us that day on the mountain top, a tentative bridge spanning the space between friendship and possibility. As we made our way back down the trail, Michael's hand occasionally brushed against mine, each brief contact sending a current of warmth through my body. He walked me to my car in the trailhead parking lot, both of us reluctant for the day to end. "Thank you for showing me this place," I said. "It was exactly what I needed." Michael studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Jessica, he began, then paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I know you came to Napa to heal, and I respect that completely. I also know there's a lot you haven't told me about what brought you here, and that's okay too. I held my breath, unsure where he was going with this. I just want you to know, he continued, that I enjoy spending time with you. A lot. And if you ever want to talk about the things you've been avoiding, I'm a pretty good listener. No pressure, though. He smiled that warm smile that had become so familiar. Either way, I'm glad our paths crossed again. In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, I felt something crack inside me. The protective shell I'd built around my heart since Tyler's betrayal. It wasn't broken, not yet, but for the first time I could imagine letting someone in again. Maybe someday soon, I said softly. But for now, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? I make a mean risotto. His smile widened. I'd like that very much. My cottage's small kitchen had never been put to much use during my stay in Napa, but that Sunday evening, it came alive with the sounds and smells of serious cooking. I stirred the risotto carefully, adding ladlefuls of warm broth as classical music played softly in the background. Through the kitchen window, I watched the sun begin its descent behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the vineyard. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. When I opened it, Michael stood on the porch holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of local wine. These were growing along my driveway, he said, handing me the colorful bouquet. I thought they'd brighten your table. The simple gesture touched me deeply. Tyler had always sent elaborate, expensive flower arrangements, chosen by his assistant, I now realized, but these hand-picked blooms felt infinitely more meaningful. They're perfect, I said, inviting him inside. Dinner was relaxed and enjoyable. Michael complimented my risotto enthusiastically. Best I've ever had, and I'm not just saying that. And the wine he'd brought paired perfectly with the meal. As we lingered over dessert, a rustic apple tart from the local bakery, our conversation turned more personal. Can I ask you something? Michael said, refilling our wine glasses. What made you decide to leave New York when you did? Was it just the divorce or something more? I tensed slightly, then reminded myself that Michael wasn't Tyler. He wasn't asking to gather information or gain advantage. He genuinely wanted to understand. It was everything, I admitted. The divorce, yes, but also discovering that my entire marriage had been based on lies. Finding out the man I loved had been using me for years to get to my family's company. I traced the rim of my wine glass, gathering courage. Did you look me up after we reconnected? The scandal was all over the news. Michael nodded. I did after our second or third cafe meeting. I was curious about what brought someone like you to Napa alone. Someone like me. Successful, connected, beautiful. His eyes held mine steadily, clearly running from something painful. I took a sip of wine, letting the warmth of his compliments and his perception wash over me. Then you know the basics. My husband was having an affair with my brother's fiancée, and both were involved in a conspiracy to destroy our family business. Saying it out loud still felt surreal. What you might not know is that I discovered it all on the day of my brother's wedding. I actually caught them together, heard them talking about me like I was nothing more than a stepping stone. Michael's expression darkened. I'm so sorry, Jessica. No one deserves that kind of betrayal. The worst part wasn't even the affair. I continued, the words flowing more easily now. It was realizing that everything I thought we had, 5 years of marriage, all those moments I treasured, was just part of his plan, a means to an end. That's why you needed to get away, Michael said, to figure out what was real. Exactly. I looked at him with newfound appreciation. You understand. I've never experienced anything on that scale, he said, but betrayal leaves the same scars no matter the size of the wound. It makes you question your judgment, your worth. I nodded, feeling the sting of tears. I keep asking myself how I could have been so blind. There must have been signs. Michael reached across the table and tentatively covered my hand with his. People like your ex-husband, people who can maintain a deception for years, they're practiced at it. They know exactly how to make you see what they want you to see. His touch was warm and grounding, his words a balm to my battered self-confidence. Thank you, I whispered, for not thinking I was a fool. Never, he said firmly. Just someone who chose to see the good in people. That's not a flaw, Jessica. It's a strength, even if it leaves you vulnerable sometimes. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, his hand still covering mine, the connection between us deepening with each passing second. "What about you?" I finally asked. "You mentioned a failed marriage. What happened?" Michael withdrew his hand slowly and leaned back in his chair, his expression turning reflective. "I married young, 24 right after the police academy. Sarah was my high school sweetheart." He smiled faintly at the memory. "We thought we knew what we were doing, but we had no idea how my job would affect our relationship. The late nights, the stress I brought home, the dangers she couldn't stop worrying about. It wore us down." "How long were you together?" "Married for 3 years, but we'd been a couple since we were 16. He shrugged. "No affairs, no dramatic betrayals, just two people who grew in different directions. The divorce was amicable, but it still hurt like hell." I nodded, understanding completely. "And you never remarried? Never came close?" His eyes met mine. "The job took precedence for a long time. Then, as I got older, it became harder to find someone who made me want to rearrange my priorities." The implication hung in the air between us, that perhaps now he'd found a reason to reconsider those priorities. The thought sent a flutter of nervous excitement through me. As the evening drew to a close, Michael helped me clear the table and wash the dishes, our bodies moving in easy coordination around the small kitchen. When everything was clean and put away, we found ourselves standing close together in the narrow space, the air between us charged with unspoken possibility. "Thank you for dinner," he said softly, "and for trusting me with your story." "Thank you for listening," I replied, suddenly aware of how near he was, how his clean, woodsy scent enveloped me. "And for the flowers." Michael reached up slowly, telegraphing his intentions, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple gesture sent shivers down my spine. "Jessica," he murmured, his voice deep and tender, "I would very much like to kiss you right now, but only if you're ready." My heart raced. Was I ready? 3 months ago, my world had shattered. The wounds were still healing, the trust still rebuilding. But standing there in the soft kitchen light, looking into Michael's honest blue eyes, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always mean waiting until every scar has faded before moving forward. Sometimes it means taking a leap of faith, even when you're still afraid. I answered by rising on my tiptoes and pressing my lips gently to his. Michael responded with restrained tenderness, his hands coming to rest lightly on my waist as he returned the kiss. It was brief, but perfect. A promise rather than a demand, a beginning rather than a culmination. When we parted, his smile was radiant. "I've been wanting to do that since the day on the mountain," he admitted. "I'm glad you waited," I said. "I needed time. I would have waited much longer." He brushed his thumb across my cheek. "You're worth being patient for Jessica Myers." As he left that night, promising to call me the next day, I stood on the cottage porch, watching his car disappear down the long driveway. For the first time since discovering Tyler's betrayal, I felt the stirrings of real hope. Not just for recovery from what had happened, but for something new and beautiful growing from the ashes of what I'd lost. The following months unfolded like a gentle dream. Michael and I developed a relationship that progressed at its own natural pace, unhurried but steadily deepening. We hiked together on weekends, discovering hidden corners of the valley. We explored small towns along the coast, had picnics in vineyards, and spent quiet evenings talking by my cottage fireplace. Unlike Tyler, who had always been careful to keep certain parts of his life separate from mine, Michael integrated me fully into his world. He introduced me to his colleagues at the sheriff's department, invited me to dinner with his closest friends, and shared stories about his family back in Oregon. "My mother is already asking about you," he told me one evening as we prepared dinner together in his rustic cabin on the outskirts of town. I told her it's too soon for her to start planning a wedding, but she's not convinced. I laughed, slicing tomatoes for the salad. "What exactly have you been telling her about me?" Michael wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Only that I've met someone extraordinary who makes me happier than I've been in years." Turning in his embrace, I kissed him softly. "The feeling is mutual, you know." As my 3-month rental agreement neared its end, I faced a decision. Nathan had been calling regularly, keeping me updated on the legal proceedings against Blackwood, Tyler, and Olivia, and gently suggesting it might be time to come home. "The company needs you, Jess," he said during one of our weekly calls. "And frankly, so do I. The brownstone's sold, by the way. Your portion of the funds is in your account." I appreciated his concern, but the thought of returning to New York filled me with dread. Not just because of the painful memories, but because it would mean leaving the new life I was building. Leaving Michael. One evening in mid-December, as we sat before a crackling fire in my cottage wrapped in a shared blanket, I broached the subject that had been weighing on my mind. "My lease is up next week," I said. "Nathan wants me to come back to New York." Michael tensed beside me. "And what do you want?" I turned to look at him, taking in the face that had become so dear to me. The laugh lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples, the mouth that smiled so easily. "I want to stay," I said simply. "I've been happier here in these 3 months than I was in years of marriage. I've started building my consultancy business, I have clients who value my work, and—" I took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with more than just the valley." Michael's eyes softened. "Jessica," he began, but I placed a finger against his lips. "Let me finish. I know it's soon. I know some people would say I'm on the rebound or that I haven't given myself enough time to heal. But I've never been more certain of anything. What I feel for you is real. More real than what I had with Tyler, because this time I'm seeing clearly. I'm not blinded by illusions or false promises." Gently removing my finger, Michael cradled my face in his hands. "I love you too," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I think I have since that day in the cafe when you looked up and recognized me. And for the record, I don't think it's too soon. Some connections don't need years to validate them. They just feel right from the start." "So you want me to stay?" I asked, hardly daring to believe this second chance at happiness. "More than anything." He kissed me deeply, then pulled back with a smile. "Move in with me. My cabin isn't as charming as this cottage, but it's mine, and there's plenty of room for your design studio in the sunroom." Tears of joy sprang to my eyes. "Are you sure?" "Never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied, echoing my words. "Stay, Jessica. Build your business here. Build a life with me." 2 weeks later, I stood in the doorway of Michael's cabin, our cabin now, watching as he and Nathan carried the last of my belongings inside. My brother had flown out to help with the move and to meet the man who had become so important to me. To my relief, Nathan and Michael had taken to each other immediately. They were out on the deck now, deep in conversation, their breath visible in the crisp winter air. Watching them together, the two men I loved most in this world, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. 6 months ago, I had thought my life was over. The betrayal had seemed unsurvivable, the pain too great to overcome. Yet here I was, building something new and beautiful from the wreckage, a career of my own, a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, and a future full of promise. As Michael caught my eye and smiled that warm smile that never failed to make my heart skip a beat, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found where I belonged. Not in the glittering social world of New York, but here in this peaceful valley with this kind, steadfast man who had helped me remember what real love felt like. The road to healing wasn't over. There would still be difficult days, moments of doubt, echoes of past pain. But for the first time since that fateful wedding day, I was truly looking forward to tomorrow. And all the tomorrows after that. 2 years had passed since I'd moved to Napa Valley, and life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. My design consultancy had grown from a one-woman operation to a small but thriving business with 3 employees. Michael and I had celebrated our first wedding anniversary with a quiet weekend in Mendocino, and Nathan had found happiness with a kind-hearted kindergarten teacher named Emily. The ghosts of the past had faded, not disappeared entirely, but diminished to shadows that rarely disturbed my peace. Tyler was serving a reduced sentence for his role in the conspiracy, while Olivia had been granted probation in exchange for testimony against Robert Blackwood. The Blackwood Holdings empire had crumbled its former CEO, now serving time for fraud and corporate espionage. It should have been the perfect epilogue to a painful chapter, but life, I was learning, rarely provides such neat conclusions. The day everything changed started ordinarily enough. It was Emma's 2nd birthday, Emma being our adorable daughter with Michael's blue eyes and my dark hair. We'd planned a small celebration at home with Nathan and Emily, who had flown in from New York for the occasion, and a few close friends from Napa. The living room was festooned with pink balloons and streamers. A homemade cake adorned with 2 candles sat on the dining table, and a small pile of wrapped gifts waited in the corner. Emma toddled around in her birthday dress, delighting in the attention. "She's getting so big," Nathan remarked, watching his niece with evident affection. "Hard to believe she's 2 already." I nodded, feeling the familiar blend of joy and wistfulness that parenthood brings. Time moves differently when you have a child. The doorbell rang just as we were preparing to cut the cake. Michael went to answer it, returning moments later with a beautifully wrapped package in his hands and a puzzled expression on his face. "Special delivery," he said, setting the box on the table. "But there's no sender information." The package was exquisite, wrapped in silver paper with a delicate pink ribbon, clearly the work of a high-end boutique rather than a department store. A small envelope was tucked under the ribbon. Probably from one of my clients. I suggested, though something about the anonymous nature of the gift made me uneasy. They know I had a baby. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a card bearing a short message in elegant handwriting. "Happy birthday to my precious granddaughter. With love, Grandma." A chill ran down my spine. My mother had died years ago, and Michael's mother, very much alive in Oregon, had sent her gift last week, a handmade quilt that now adorned Emma's crib. Who then was claiming to be Emma's grandmother? With trembling fingers, I opened the package. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, lay a small white gold bracelet. The delicate chain supported a single charm, a perfectly crafted lotus flower with a tiny diamond at its center. "That's expensive," Nathan observed, peering over my shoulder. "Who sent it?" I handed him the card. "Someone claiming to be Emma's grandmother." Nathan's brow furrowed as he read the card, then examined the handwriting more closely. "This seems familiar somehow," he murmured. "But I can't place it." Michael Ever, the detective, was already inspecting the package. "No return address, no shipping label. It must have been hand-delivered. I'll check our security camera footage." The celebration continued, but an undercurrent of tension had been introduced. Who was sending anonymous, expensive gifts to my daughter? Was it someone connected to my past in New York, a remnant of the Blackwood conspiracy we'd missed, or something else entirely? Later that night, after the guests had gone and Emma was asleep, Michael, Nathan, and I gathered in the living room to discuss the mysterious gift. "The security footage shows a standard courier service," Michael reported. "Nothing suspicious there. I called the company, but they said the package was left at their office with cash payment and instructions for delivery. The person who dropped it off used a fake name." "Could it be connected to Blackwood somehow?" I suggested. "Some kind of intimidation tactic." Nathan shook his head. "Blackwood is securely behind bars and his organization has been dismantled. Besides, this doesn't feel threatening, just strange." I thought back, trying to remember if I'd seen that handwriting before. It looked almost like Mom's, but more elegant somehow. "Wait," Nathan said suddenly. "The white roses." "What white roses?" "At the opening of the Myers Corporation's West Coast office last year, you received an anonymous bouquet of white roses with a card that just said congratulations. Remember?" The memory clicked into place. "You're right. The handwriting was the same. I assumed it was from a business associate and didn't think much of it." "Someone's been watching you," Michael said quietly, his police instincts fully engaged. "For over a year at least, and now they're reaching out to Emma." A protective surge rose within me. I need to know who this person is and what they want with my daughter. "We all do," Nathan agreed grimly. The next morning, after Nathan and Emily returned to New York, Michael and I began investigating in earnest. We started with the jewelry. The lotus charm was distinctive enough that we hoped to trace its origins. We visited every high-end jeweler in Napa and San Francisco, but none recognized the design or craftsmanship. Over the following weeks, I became aware of small, unsettling signs that we were indeed being watched. A black sedan that appeared too frequently on our street. A elegantly dressed older woman at the park who seemed overly interested in Emma. Small, expensive gifts left on our porch with no card or explanation. "This has gone on long enough," I said to Michael one evening after discovering another anonymous package, a hand-knitted sweater in Emma's exact size. "I need answers." "I agree," Michael replied, his expression troubled. "But we've exhausted all the usual investigative avenues. The person is being extremely careful." I paced our living room, frustrated and increasingly frightened. There has to be a connection we're missing. The handwriting, the expensive gifts, the focus on Emma. I stopped suddenly as a thought struck me. Maybe the answers aren't here in Napa. Maybe they're in New York, in my past. Michael studied me carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I need to go back to my parents' house. There might be clues there, something I've overlooked or forgotten." 2 days later, I found myself standing alone in the dusty attic of my childhood home in Westchester County. The sprawling house had stood empty since my parents' deaths, maintained by a caretaker, but preserved almost exactly as they had left it. Nathan and I had never had the heart to sell it, though neither of us had wanted to live there with its bittersweet memories. The attic was filled with the accumulated treasures of the Myers family: furniture paintings, photographs, and dozens of boxes containing everything from holiday decorations to family documents. I started with my mother's personal effects carefully stored in cedar chests to protect them from time. Hours passed as I sifted through clothing, jewelry, and mementos. My eyes grew tired and my back ached from bending over boxes, but I pressed on, driven by the certainty that answers lay hidden somewhere in this room. As the afternoon light began to fade, I noticed a small wooden trunk tucked behind a stack of old suitcases. It wasn't familiar to me, which was strange. I thought I knew every item in this attic from childhood explorations. The trunk was locked with a small brass padlock, but the key was missing. Determined, I found a screwdriver in an old toolbox and managed to pry the lock open. Inside the trunk, beneath layers of yellowed tissue paper, lay a collection of letters tied with faded purple ribbon. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant and distinctive, immediately recognizable as the same script from Emma's birthday card. With trembling hands, I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. "My dearest sister Eleanor," it began. "1 year has passed since that terrible day when you saved me from the burning car. I still don't know how to thank you for your sacrifice. Not just for saving my life, but for taking care of my precious children while I must remain in hiding." I sank to the dusty floor, the letter clutched in my hand. Eleanor, my mother's name. But who was writing to her, and what children were they referring to? Letter after letter revealed an extraordinary story. They spanned decades, sent from various locations in Europe, France, Switzerland, Italy. All were addressed to "my dearest sister Eleanor," and signed simply Victoria. As I read, a shocking truth emerged. Eleanor Myers, the woman I had always called mother, was actually my aunt. My biological mother was this Victoria who had apparently survived a car accident that the world believed had claimed her life. But why the deception? Why had Victoria remained hidden all these years? The answers came in the later letters. Blackwood's reach grows longer each year. One letter from the 1990s stated, "I fear he will never stop looking for me, knowing I am the only one who can testify to what really happened that night. Please, sister, continue to protect my children. They must never know the danger that shadows their name." Blackwood, the same man who had tried to destroy the Myers Corporation, the same man who had orchestrated Tyler and Olivia's betrayal. The connection I'd been missing was suddenly crystal clear. This wasn't a new threat, but the final act of a decades-old vendetta. The last letter was dated just 5 years ago, the handwriting noticeably shakier. "My dearest Eleanor, I fear my time grows short. The illness has spread and the doctors give me little hope. My only regret is that I never returned to embrace my children, to tell them the truth, to explain that my absence was my only means of protecting them. If you think they are ready, please share these letters after I am gone, and the key enclosed will open my safe deposit box in Zurich. Everything I have is theirs by right. All my love now and always, Victoria." Tears streamed down my face as I carefully folded the letters. My mother, my real mother, had sacrificed everything to protect us living in exile while her sister raised her children. And now somehow she was reaching out to my daughter from beyond the grave. But how was that possible? And what did the safe deposit box contain? With the letters and the key tucked safely in my bag, I returned to the hotel where Michael was waiting with Emma. His face registered alarm when he saw my tear-streaked face. "Jessica, what happened? What did you find?" The revelation about my true parentage shook Nathan even more deeply than it had me. As we sat in his New York office the following day, the stack of Victoria's letters between us, his normally composed face reflected shocked grief and confusion. "All these years," he said hoarsely. "Eleanor, Mom, never said a word. She raised us as her own, carried this secret to her grave." "She was protecting us," I said gently, "and protecting Victoria." "But from what exactly?" Nathan flipped through the letters again. "These hint at something terrible, something involving Blackwood, but they're frustratingly vague on details." Michael, who had been quietly studying the letters while Nathan and I processed our emotions, spoke up. "The key piece seems to be this car accident. Victoria mentions being saved from the burning car and then having to go into hiding. What do we know about this accident? Nothing, I admitted. It must have happened before Nathan and I were born or when we were too young to remember. Then that's where we start, Michael said firmly. If this accident is connected to Blackwood, there should be records. Using Nathan's corporate resources and Michael's law enforcement contacts, we began piecing together a timeline. The breakthrough came when we located Paul Jenkins, a retired chauffeur who had worked for Reed Jewelers, a once prominent company that had mysteriously collapsed in the 1990s. We met Paul in his modest retirement home in Queens. At 82, he was frail, but sharp-minded, his eyes lighting with recognition when he saw Nathan. "My God," he whispered. "You look just like your father. You're Richard Reed's boy, aren't you?" Nathan and I exchanged startled glances. "Reed," Nathan repeated. "Our father was Richard Myers." Paul shook his head slowly. "No, young man. Your father was Richard Reed, CEO of Reed Jewelers. And you—" He turned to me, eyes glistening. "You have your mother's eyes, Victoria's eyes." Over the next hour, Paul revealed a history we'd never imagined. Richard Reed had been a brilliant jeweler and businessman, building Reed Jewelers into one of America's premier luxury brands. Robert Blackwood had been his ambitious vice president, hungry for control of the company. The day of the accident, Paul recounted, "Mr. Blackwood sent me on an errand to Connecticut, unusual since I was always Mr. Reed's personal driver. He replaced me with a new hire I didn't know. Hours later, I heard the news the company car had gone off a cliff in the Catskills, exploding on impact. They said all 4 occupants died, Mr. and Mrs. Reed and the driver and his wife. But my mother survived," I said quietly. Paul nodded. "I never knew for certain, but I suspected. The bodies were badly damaged in the fire. Identification was difficult. I tried to tell the police that the car had been meticulously maintained, that an accident like that was almost impossible, but no one listened." "And Blackwood took control of Reed Jewelers," Nathan concluded. "Within days," Paul confirmed. "And the company began to change. The quality declined, longtime employees were let go, and within 5 years, Reed Jewelers was bankrupt, but somehow Blackwood emerged wealthy enough to start Blackwood Holdings." "He engineered the accident," Michael said grimly. "And when Victoria somehow survived, he must have threatened her, forced her to stay dead while he looted the company." "But why did she never come forward?" I asked. "Even years later." "Fear," Paul suggested. "Not for herself, but for you children. Blackwood was ruthless. If he'd known Victoria was alive, that she could testify against him." The implication hung heavily in the air. "My mother had given up everything, her identity, her children, her life, to keep us safe from a man who had already proven he was willing to kill for power." "There's one more thing," Paul added. "Mr. Blackwood was paranoid. He had recording devices installed throughout the executive offices, supposedly for security, but really to spy on conversations. Mr. Reed discovered one in his office shortly before the accident." "Do you think those recordings still exist?" Michael asked intently. "The old Reed building still stands," Paul replied. "Blackwood Holdings acquired it years ago. Mr. Reed's office on the top floor was sealed after his death, supposedly as a memorial, but no one was ever allowed inside." Nathan and I looked at each other, the same thought forming in our minds. If Blackwood had preserved Richard Reed's office as a shrine, there might still be evidence inside. Evidence that could finally reveal the full truth of what had happened to our parents. "We need to get into that office," Nathan said decisively. Michael shook his head. "The Blackwood Tower has state-of-the-art security. We can't just walk in and ask for a tour." "No," I agreed, "but we might not have to." I pulled out my phone and showed them something I'd noticed earlier. The Myers Corporation Tower, which Nathan had built 5 years ago, stood directly adjacent to the Blackwood Tower in downtown Manhattan. "The roofs are almost level," I pointed out. "If we can access our building after hours—" Michael stared at me incredulously. "You're suggesting we break into Blackwood Tower via the roof? That's insanely dangerous and illegal." "Not if Nathan authorizes our presence in the Myers building," I countered. "And technically we're not breaking in. We're investigating a decades-old crime scene that might hold evidence of multiple homicides." Nathan looked torn between admiration for my audacity and concern for our safety. "It's risky, Jess. Very risky." So was living our entire lives in ignorance, I replied firmly. I need to know the truth, Nathan. For Emma, for us, and for the mother we never got to know. After much debate, a plan took shape. 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, Nathan, Michael, and I stood on the roof of the Myers Tower, looking across the 15-foot gap to the Blackwood Tower roof. The night was clear but windy, making our task even more dangerous. Michael, who had experience with rock climbing, secured a line between the buildings and went first, moving with confident precision across the gap. Nathan followed, his business attire incongruous with the daring maneuver. When it was my turn, I fought to control my fear as I gripped the line and began the crossing. The city lights sparkled far below, a dizzying reminder of the consequences of a mistake. But the thought of my mother, Victoria Reed, gave me courage. She had sacrificed everything for us. I could brave this height for her. Once safely across, we disabled the roof access alarm using equipment Nathan had brought and made our way down to the executive floor. The hallway was dim, illuminated only by emergency lighting. At the end stood a set of double doors marked simply RR, my father's initials. The old lock yielded to Michael's expertise, and we stepped into a time capsule. The office was exactly as Paul had described. Elegant wood-paneled walls, leather furniture, and a massive desk overlooking the Manhattan skyline. A layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for decades. The recording device was supposedly hidden behind that painting, Michael said, pointing to a large oil landscape hanging behind the desk. Nathan carefully removed the painting, revealing a small alcove in the wall. Inside was an old recording device, primitive by today's standards, but sophisticated for its time. Will it still work after all these years? I wondered. Unlikely, Michael admitted, but the tapes might be salvageable with the right equipment. While Michael carefully extracted the recorder, I searched the bookshelves, drawn by an intuition I couldn't explain. Among the leather-bound legal volumes, one book, Justice and Truth, seemed slightly out of alignment with its neighbors. When I pulled it from the shelf, I discovered it was hollowed out, containing a small black journal. The first page bore my father's name in bold script, property of Richard Reed. Footsteps in the corridor froze us in place. Security guards were making their rounds. Michael quickly shut off his flashlight, and we pressed ourselves against the wall behind a large filing cabinet. The door opened, a beam of light sweeping across the room. "Just checking the sealed office," a voice said. "Mr. Blackwood's standing orders." My heart pounded so loudly I was certain the guards would hear it. After what felt like an eternity, they closed the door and moved on. We waited several agonizing minutes before daring to move again. "We need to go," Michael whispered urgently. "Now!" With the recorder and journal secure in our backpacks, we made our way back to the roof and across the precarious line to the safety of the Myers Tower. Only when we were back in Nathan's office doors, locked behind us, did I allow myself to breathe normally again. "I can't believe we just did that," Nathan said, loosening his tie with shaking hands. "I can't believe it worked," Michael replied, carefully placing the recorder on Nathan's desk. But what did we find? The journal proved to be a gold mine. My father had meticulously documented his growing suspicions about Blackwood's financial manipulations, including details of offshore accounts and fraudulent transactions. The final entry, dated just days before the fatal accident, was chilling in its prescience. Confronted RB today about the Singapore transfers. His reaction confirms my worst fears. Have moved all critical documentation to Swiss account for safekeeping. Eleanor has the key if anything should happen to me. Must protect Victoria and the children at all costs. With specialized equipment borrowed from a former colleague of Michael's, we managed to recover audio from the ancient recorder. The final recording captured my father's last phone conversation with Blackwood. "I know what you've been doing, Robert. The board meeting on Monday will be your last day at Reed Jewelers. I have all the evidence needed to send you to prison for a very long time." Blackwood's voice was cold. "You're making a serious mistake, Richard. Think of your family." "Is that a threat?" my father demanded. "A friendly warning," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Accidents happen every day." The recording ended there, the last words my father would exchange with the man who would orchestrate his death just days later.